So I am a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. It's an international organization started by Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick, who wrote the book on motivational interviewing. And it's a group. It's worldwide, and we work together to try to be aware of the best practices and training and keep up with the latest information about motivational interviewing and what works and share ideas. It's a really terrific group, and it's great that I get to interact with Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick on occasion. So that's my little fangirl kind of moments. But I do have a book coming out myself in October, which is called the Motivational Interviewing Workbook, Exercises to Decide What You Want and How to Get There. So this will be in October. I don't have an exact date, but I believe it's going to be an ebook, and it'll be available like on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy your ebooks from. And it's a self-help book. It's not for necessarily for practitioners, but I do think that practitioners will definitely find it useful because I have a ton of exercises in there that help people decide, evaluate what their concerns are, what they might change, setting goals, identifying obstacles to changing, and also coming up with reasons for change, and then developing a change plan. Hang on, let me see how my thing works here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to give you a brief overview. I'll talk just a little bit, very briefly, about motivational interviewing, just to put us on the same page. But what I'm going to focus on is, the concept of empathy, how it fits with motivational interviewing and other person-centered theories, and how it fits with commitment to change, essentially how it helps you facilitate change with your clients. And we'll go over some strategies that will help you to build more empathy, but also you can use any of these exercises with your clients to teach them better empathy to improve their relationships with others. Okay, so what do we mean by empathy? Well, I think most of us understand that it's our ability to perceive and identify with another person's perspective. So to be able to sense something about what they might be, how they view things, it's understanding, experiencing, responding to their emotional state and maybe what their ideas and thoughts are. So we kind of get that it's a way of understanding other people, right? But it's also can be a skill. However, it's more than just a technique. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is based on Bill Miller, who actually wrote a separate book about called Listening Well. I think it's something like Building Empathy Skills. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but I do have it in the references, the official name of the book. But it is a book that he wrote about empathy. So he really talks about it being a part of who you are. That, when we make a conscious effort to try to get what where the other person is coming from, and being open to understanding those experiences of other people. And this particularly, and I promise I'm not going to get political today during our session, but it does make me think about what's going on today, and how having really good empathy skills helps you at least be able to perceive where that opposition may be coming from. Not just Trump versus Biden, but also, we think about all of the marches that have been going on, racial concerns, any of that we start to take the time to really try to understand where the opposite is coming from, the opposite side might be coming from. So I have a quick thing. This is sort of a cartoon mixed with Brene Brown. Many of you might be familiar with her. She does a lot of great writing and blogging and talking. And so she has this short piece of her discussion on empathy. So I just want to share this real quick, but kind of her thoughts about it.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So I love the way that she talks about that, and that it does have to do with connecting with people. And we might need to relate it to something inside of ourselves. And if we can't, we at least recognize that. So we'll talk some more about that as we get into empathy. So let's come back to motivational interviewing. What does this have to do with motivational interviewing? Well, it is it's a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication. So Miller and Romick really talk about it being really an approach, that it's not a technique. And the skills that are used are all common counseling skills, like open-ended questions, affirmations, and reflections. But it's how we use these skills that matter, and where we're coming from in our own mindset. So it is a collaborative approach, in that it's a partnership, that we may bring our own expertise, but we allow the client to bring their expertise. We respect that they are the expert on their own lives. It is goal-oriented. So in some ways, it's a bit directive. While we prefer to say coaching style or guiding, it is still directive in a way, that there is a particular direction of change. And the idea of calling it a style of communication is that, I teach people who aren't necessarily counselors or social workers, or even people who are paraprofessionals and may not have a degree, that anyone can learn this kind of approach, the spirit of this approach. The other important thing about this approach is that we are paying attention to the language of change, that this idea of change talk is really what makes this motivational interviewing. So we're listening to how they think and talk about their potential change. And we take that language and when we guide them in a way that will strengthen their own motivation and reasons for change. So it's not about us trying to convince them to change or including any of those platitudes, like in the Brene Brown example. I thought that was pretty funny, where I don't know if that's an elk or a buck or something that's talking and says, well, at least you can get pregnant, at least you have a marriage. But sometimes we try to say things because we're trying to fix it for them. That's not what we do in motivational interviewing. It's about helping them to fix it for themselves. And we do this within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So this is the other important piece that hopefully now starts to make sense why we say empathy is such an important part of accurately using and applying motivational interviewing. So that said, let me go to the next one. So I did, in the chat, if anybody's able to open that, in the chat, I did send you the slides so that you do have those for yourself. And the core principles of motivational interviewing are PACE. And by using these principles to guide us in how we use the strategies and the core skills, we lead to the spirit of motivational interviewing. So what Miller and Rolnick say is that, you may not use all of the components of motivational interviewing every time you see a client, right? But the spirit of it should always be there no matter what other kind of strategies or evidence-based practices that you're using. So PACE is partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. So I mentioned the partnership as that collaboration that we ask them, what do they think? What are your goals? What concerns you? So we work as much together on understanding the problem and coming up with the plan. Acceptance is a big piece, and I'm gonna talk more about that in just a moment. But compassion is actually a little bit separate from acceptance. I kind of wondered this myself, that when Miller and Rolnick came out with their revised edition, I think it was 2013, that they changed this this acronym up a little bit. It used to be slightly different, but they added compassion as a separate principle. And so part of compassion goes beyond empathy, and that actually empathy says, I understand that this is difficult for you or you're having a hard time. Compassion says, I want to help you with it. I feel compelled to do something. That's compassion. And then we have evocation, which is to evoke. As we mentioned, we're evoking their reasons for change, their confidence in their ability to change, trying to get them to get to that commitment that I will, not just that I want to change or I'm able to change or have reasons to change, but that I will work on change. So that's all together is the spirit. But let's look more closely at acceptance, because acceptance actually has 4 different components to it. And it starts with accurate empathy. So understanding by seeing through the client's eyes. So that is what we're going to focus on. But really all of these pieces still go with demonstrating good empathy and having accurate empathy. And that comes from absolute worth, which if you're a Carl Rogers person, that's the unconditional positive regard, right? It's judgment free. And I think that Brene Brown mentioned that too, that, we try to withhold judgment, that we're not assigning our own values to what they might be experiencing. Then we also have autonomy, which is to respect that the client is in the driver's seat. So other than certain ethical issues, such as a client who may be a danger to themselves or others, generally speaking, they have the right to make their own decisions. So even when they're mandated, even when you make recommendations for certain care, they still have the right to choose what they will follow and what they will change and work on. It's their journey. Then we also have affirmations, which is also a skill, and that's giving feedback about their efforts, their accomplishments. So we'll actually talk a little bit about this as well, because this is part of demonstrating, actually it is part of demonstrating empathy. So all of that together is the acceptance that that there is actually research that says when you accept someone where they are, you free them to change. And that's the strength, that's just the irony of it, that, you know, the more you try to convince someone that they should change and you argue for change, the more likely they are to not change, to resist that. I just wanted to keep an eye real quick. I don't know. Hang on, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time here. It's like it's not working for me. Hang on. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Hang on, let me close this thing out real quick. Okay. So what is motivation? Well, in motivational interviewing, it's actually very helpful to think of motivation as more than just I'm motivated or I'm not. So I'm committed or I'm not. And that when somebody actually is somewhere in between, we still often think of that as, say, denial, when really it's actually ambivalence, that the person may want to change or maybe know they should, but there's always the but. Miller and Ronlett talk about motivation in terms of being ready, willing, and able. This is one of the simplest ways to kind of break down motivation. And it's one of my favorites that I use this a lot when I'm listening to my clients or I'm listening to another, you know, in our role plays, when I do workshops, that what I'm listening for is, are you ready, willing, and able to make the change? So readiness really actually is kind of the last thing that tends to happen. That is the matter of priority. So when you say if somebody's ready for change, you're saying that they have prioritized it. It's at the top of the list. So just try to imagine there's probably something that you're working on for yourself, you know, maybe to eat more healthy, to exercise more, to be more organized, or spend more quality time with your family. Whatever something that you personally know that you would like to work on or know you should, but you're struggling with it. And if I asked you what's in the way, what's getting in the way, that many of you would probably answer, I don't have time. And really what that is a matter of priorities. And that given your list of priorities, and we all certainly have long lists of things to do, that particular change is probably near the bottom of the list. So in the 24 hours a day that we all have, you are choosing to do these other priorities in front of that one. So I'm not saying that as a judgment call, or, you know, I'm not, you know, making that, you know, I'm not judging you for that. It's just the way that we prioritize. That's how people change. That's how people get things done, is that they prioritize certain matters in their life. But before we even get to that, we have to be willing, and willing really is the bottom line problem recognition. That if we don't see it as a problem, if we don't see the discrepancy between my reality and what my goal or ideal is, then we're not going to work on a change. There's nothing to prioritize. So having that discrepancy is part of our motivation. That's part of getting us toward the idea of change. So if there's not problem recognition, then we need to develop discrepancy. And that is actually one of the webinars I will be offering in, I think, a couple of months. I think that one's in October, if you're interested. So that's really good with people where you might say that's denial rather than ambivalence. But the other aspect of motivation is confidence. So being ready, willing, and able. A person's confidence in their ability to make the change. So they may want to, it might be very important to them, but if they don't have confidence in their ability to change, then they're not likely to make the change. It doesn't mean they're in denial. It doesn't mean they aren't ready. It just means they're missing something to get them across that finish line. And that confidence is something that often is related to feeling demoralized. So if that, for example, if the discrepancy between reality and the goal or ideal is too large, they might feel very defeated, that seems way out of reach and I could never accomplish that. So then they often tend to give up and go back to the status quo. Whereas at least enough confidence says, you know, I've done it before, I think I can do it, I just need to prioritize it. So that's slightly different. And in understanding that when you're engaging and focusing with your client, that will help you then realize what needs to happen before you can move on to how are you going to make this change. So before you start doing cognitive behavioral therapy or doing EMDR, whatever it is that you want to make sure, are they ready, willing, and able to commit to that particular change. So let's look at ambivalence for a second here. That feeling two different ways about something at the same time is actually very normal. And this is really what motivational interviewing was intended to do. And that using good empathy to help them understand and feel understood that, wow, you feel really ambivalent about this change, and to actually validate it too, that this is completely normal for people to feel pulled in two different directions about a particular change. So change, it is often very scary. And so what we need to listen for, when I mentioned in defining motivational interviewing, that we pay attention to the language of change and that we are listening for that. Are they ready, willing, and able? So if they are ready, willing, and able, so that's at the bottom there, if they're highly motivated, then you go on and do whatever action plan, make a plan and implement it. That they don't need motivational interviewing. They need whatever other treatment and services and resources are that you're offering them. However, if a person might be ready and willing, but lack that confidence. So you want to work on that confidence. You want to target that to help them build confidence to improve their commitment to making the change. A person might be willing and confident. They might say, I know I need to change that, I should, and I know how to do it. I'm just not ready to prioritize it. It's just not that important to me right now. So then you work on establishing importance with them, and that has to do with their value system. So that's some of the main things that you might be listening for, but there is one final state of being that we might also notice, is that they might be neither willing, confident, or ready. That this is where they're not motivated at all, and this is where I said that we need to build discrepancy first. We have to actually create ambivalence before we can resolve the ambivalence towards change. So let's look again at empathy in terms of ambivalence. So here's an example. And I want you to tell me how much empathy do you think is in this. Just, you don't need to answer, but just I want you to think about it as we go through this, all right? So the client says, I'm not sure I want to change. I'm just here because my caseworker told me to come. So I as interviewer, so I say, I understand. So you also understand that these sessions are required towards your probation. Client says, I know, that's why I'm here, but I don't really have a problem with drugs or alcohol though. I've been clean since I was arrested. I'm not sure what the point of these meetings are. And then I say, well, it's important to address potential triggers and come up with a plan to prevent relapse. We'll work on that together, okay? And the client says, sure, I mean, I have to be here anyway. So how supportive was I? How did I help that person become more motivated? Did you notice any kind of movement towards this person wanting to be in this treatment? So I would venture to say there's probably a lot more room for empathy here, right? So saying that we'll work on that together is wonderful. That's partnering. But let's try this with really more empathy in mind. So not fixing it, not trying to make them change, right? But to understand. Did I press the wrong? Here we go. Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. Something's happening here. Sorry, my thing is acting up for a second here. I have no idea what's going on here and why it won't move. My screen share is paused. Okay, let's try it now. There we go. I have no idea what happened, like froze on me. Okay, so let's try that again. Excuse me. So the client says, I'm not sure I want to change. I'm just here because my caseworker told me to come. So I say, you're feeling pressured to be here. Yes, I don't really have a problem with drugs or alcohol. I've been clean since I was arrested. I'm not sure what the point of these meetings are. You're unclear about what happens in counseling, so you don't know what you might get out of being here. Yeah, I mean, I think I have it handled now. Since you've been able to abstain on your own, you're feeling confident that you won't have any further trouble. Yes, exactly. Well, would you mind if I told you a bit about what we do here? Then you can decide if you think this is something that might be beneficial to you and help your legal situation. So again, it's not time to, I'm not fixing it for them yet. And, you know, at this point, the person isn't, still doesn't express an interest in being here, but from what their reaction is, how sort of open do you think they might be since I asked them if I can talk to them about what I do here? Does that make sense? So here I'm actually building, this is engaging the person. They are building a rapport with me at this point. So this isn't the point to try to fix them or make them change their mind. It's to understand them, and then I can ask them if they will listen to another point of view. All right, so, you know, Brene Brown talked about some components of empathy. You know, she talked about being able to, you know, basically you have to perceive that somebody is struggling. You need to connect somehow with it. And then you need to recognize, I think it was recognize what that emotion was and then express it. I believe that was the fourth one she talked about. From a more clinical perspective, there are different ways to think about it. I realize that. And this was kind of a combination of sources that I used to think about this. But certainly there is the emotional aspect of empathy. So that's the most common thing that we think about, right? Is how somebody feels. And that you notice when they're feeling good, when they're feeling not good. And then all those obviously descriptions we can use for different kinds of emotions. And so being able to accurately perceive their emotion, it is very important. And it is a way to say, wow, you seem like something's bothering you, right? That's the bottom line of really being empathetic. But there is another aspect which has to do with cognitive, and not just cognitive in terms of what do I think they're thinking, but it's how we start to process what we think is going on. So this self-other awareness means I'm aware that you may be thinking something different than I might be thinking. And if I were in your shoes, that might not be what I'm thinking, right? We may not have that in common, but I'm able to work on an interpretation to see, well, maybe this is what you are thinking. And then the third component is to act on it, right? Is to express concern, compassion. There is another thing to kind of think about, and these are, I have several resources on the last slide. There are references that you can refer to, but one of them is an article that where it's two people that wrote it, that they talk about how another component of empathy from a clinical standpoint is that ability to separate yourself. And that, yes, you have to get into their shoes, but you also have to step out of their shoes. So they talk about actually part of empathy being that I realize that's your pain, it's not mine. And that's really a important part of managing ourselves clinically, right? That how are we going to manage when you're understanding some, and you may be understanding some things about some traumatic experiences that people have been through. So we have to be able to separate ourselves in some way. I also like to say that we've heard the term of put yourself in somebody else's shoes in terms of gaining empathy. I also want to add that we need to step out of our own shoes, that we have to take those off, meaning we leave behind our biases and beliefs and values in order to truly understand the person's point of view. Now, that doesn't mean that you agree with them. And that's one of the things that sometimes people get a little nervous about, that when you use this kind of empathy is almost as if you're condoning it. And that's not true. It just means that you're understanding from their perspective so that they better understand themselves. And it doesn't mean that you don't use some really good reflections and open-ended questions to get them to think about it. All right, so let me go to, so what are the benefits of empathy? So first of all, in general, and this is as humans in general, as humans, not necessarily as practitioners, but that being empathetic, it really helps children to not be so mean, right? That whole idea of how do we, stop bullying? How do we deal with this kind of antisocial behavior in children? That social skills are taught, that they actually need to be taught how to empathize and care about what other people are going through. So it helps to inhibit that sort of negative behavior and inhibit the aggressive behavior. And then overall, it promotes healthy personal development, that we can have better relationships with people around us, so therefore have more fulfilling lives. The other aspect for us as practitioners then is that it does help us have better client outcomes. That clients like to be understood, and actually that's true in terms of if you're a supervisor of somebody, an employee who is also like, say, for example, seeking licensure, that having a supervisor who is understanding means so much to them. So when we pay special attention to empathy and have positive regard for the client, that is part of that relationship aspect that leads to positive outcomes. So there's technical aspects of what we do, and there's the relational aspects of what we do, and both of those together are what lead to the positive outcomes for our clients. So technical is whatever approach you're using. If it's motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral, acceptance and commitment therapy, whatever your approach is, that's your technical. But the relational aspect is that relationship, right? That we do know that there is something to be said for having a good rapport, and using empathy is a great way to get there. So empathy, and this is from the article I was mentioning, empathy can be taught, increased, refined, and mediated to make helping professionals more skillful and resilient, connect more empathically with clients from a wider range of sociocultural backgrounds, while making us less vulnerable to becoming overwhelmed, burnt out, or dysfunctionally enmeshed with our clients. So it is that piece of, we have to connect, but we also have to disconnect. And I was going to say something else. Oh, and to, particularly because we can't always self-identify with all of our clients, right? So if any of you are a person in recovery, whether it's from mental illness and or addiction, that with your clients, there are ways that you already identify with them. But for example, when I started back, and I was spent over 25 years in the field myself before I became an educator. But one of my internship and one of my first jobs was to working with addicted mothers. And I was a young 20-something-year-old, and I was married, but other than that, I didn't have children. These were women who had their children taken away or were at risk of being taken away due to their addiction. And so this was a very difficult group, and many of you probably know, especially women with addictions who are, we used to say that women don't hit rock bottom, women live on the bottom, that this was a very traumatized group that I worked with. So how was I supposed to help them when I'm really I'm a rather privileged white girl? I didn't know, none of that had happened to me. I just knew I wanted to help. So I didn't try to fix it for them. I didn't try to tell them what to do. I just ended up using a lot of empathy and learning from them to be helpful. And when I left that job, it's the only job I ever got burned out on from the clients. I loved them, but it was hard. One of the clients said to me, when we were kind of talking about me leaving and doing some closure, and she said, the thing about Angie is that she makes you think. And that was the best compliment I've ever gotten from a client. I thought that was great, because that's what I felt like my job. I can't always fix it, but if I can help them think about it and help them, get some hope for a different life, then, I've done something. All right, so let's get to the meat of this now. And actually, let me pause for just a moment, because I can get up the chat box if I need to. I just want to see if there's any questions at this point, and then otherwise we'll spend the rest talking about these different strategies. So let me make sure there are any questions here. And if you're, I just want to make sure everybody's on mute. Just because we don't want to get any background noise, please. Okay, I think we got it. Okay. All right, so I don't see any questions come up. All right, so the strategies, and this is from Bill Miller's book about listening well, that there are several, and I just kind of narrowed it down to these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 6. 6 strategies that we'll talk about in terms of building empathy skills. Hold on for just a moment. Hang on. I can. Okay. So the thing I think is interesting about it, that I took especially from Bill Miller's book, is that, empathy isn't just about listening and giving good reflections. That really empathy comes from a lot of different ways, different sources. And so that's what I like about this, talking about this and thinking about different ways for us to be more empathetic with our clients and with our loved ones. So we'll talk about each of these, and I'll have some of these will have some exercises. Some will break out into some practice sessions on some of these, like this first one. So listening, which I realize that sounds duh, right? And so a lot of this probably you're like, yeah, I remember that from my training. But what I hope is that you come out of this with some new ideas on how to build more empathy for yourself and for your clients. And I think you'll get some ideas out of this. So then thinking about listening, how important is listening to being empathetic? So what we're going to do is we're going to do the breakouts, and you will, I'm trying to see here, I think that I need Lindsay to do that, because this is the way Zoom works. And so Lindsay will break you into pairs and randomly. And so when it pops up, you need to join. It'll say join breakout room and you need to accept or something. I forget exactly what it says, but you need to accept to join, and you should be partnered with someone. And what I want you to do is I'm going to give you approximately 3 to 4 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. And when I have Lindsay close the rooms, it'll tell you that you've got 60 seconds to wrap up, and it'll kick you back into this main room. All right. So just one of you needs to be the speaker, and the other person's going to just listen. You can't say anything. All right. Make sure you're both on video. That'll be important. Okay. So both on video with each other. Make sure you unmute each other, because I think when you get kicked into the breakout room, you'll automatically be muted. So unmute yourselves, start your video if you don't have video on. I understand that takes up some bandwidth, so many of you may not be on video. But one person, figure out who's going to be the speaker and just think of something to talk about, anything. So what it was like growing up, or your dream vacation, or some kind of experience you've had recently, maybe how you're dealing with all this COVID stuff, right? So just talk for a few minutes on that. And the listener, like I said, you're not going to say anything. You're not allowed to ask a question. You can't say a word. You can't use a word like yes or I understand. So no actual words, all right? Just listen. Let's go back here. And then there's also one more thing was, because I said you couldn't use words, but that doesn't mean that you can't do what we call utterances, right? Like, like some things like that. That would be okay too. So that tells us somebody's listening and paying attention. All right. So listening is great, right? But that's clearly not enough to be empathetic, right? So what we also need are to ask questions. So that actually, excuse me, so that isn't, that's helping you to be more empathetic, because there's more information that you need in order to understand the person, all right? So it's okay to ask questions, right? That helps us to get to know someone. And that's particularly true when there is some differences, that there are maybe some things that I'm not likely to understand, whether it's sociocultural or just has to do with the issue they're experiencing, whatever it might be. So, so asking questions in terms of accurate empathy. So yes, it is helpful. However, most people ask too many questions. So this is, I think, what Bill Miller talks about in this particular section of his book. And this is also something true in terms of motivational interviewing, is that you really want to try to ask a question and let them respond. And then before you ask another question, you really need to give another impactful response. So we want to avoid this sort of, barrage of questions, that too many questions in a row can feel like an interrogation, right? So even if you are doing, say, an assessment, that, you ask the question, but as they're responding, you are using at least brief reflections to indicate that you understand what they're telling you, that you're clarifying what they're telling you before you move on to those next questions. So we want to be careful. And this is something I've noticed that when we do actual role plays in motivational interviewing, that people do tend to forget about the reflections. And they ask the question and they nod their head to it because they feel like they understood what the client just said. But then they don't actually say that. They don't actually give a reflection. They just move on to the next question. So hang on, I think there was something. See if there's anything else here. Oh, chat. Hang on, I'm going to try to move this chat over here. Okay. Just a second here. Okay. I got stuff in the way. So I'm trying to keep up my thing here. Okay. And oh, so Jamie asked, what about those clients who keep answering, I don't know? So that's where actually the problem becomes, when you have a client who's doesn't share much, that asking more questions is not helpful. That you want to actually, you really need to work on empathy and using much more reflections to get that person to answer. If you, I think I tried to look for it on YouTube and I didn't find it, but there is a video from the Motivational Interviewing Training Series called The Silent Man. And he is just not going to talk at all. He doesn't want to be there. He wasn't hostile, but he just didn't want to, just wasn't going to come out and say what was going on. And Bill Miller used a bunch of reflections. It was maybe a couple of questions, but it was almost all reflections to really get at why the guy was there. It's an incredible 15 or 20 minute example if you ever can find that one. Yeah, so I don't know. So you start making guesses. So that's where empathy is so important, that you got to start making those guesses about what might be going on with them. Or, talking about defiant kids who are resistant was the other question. So, those are all part of, you really have to, excuse me, it's focusing on that engaging and, building that empathy and understanding that they don't want to be there. So it's really not, so the questions, they may or may not answer them in the moment. So that's one of the things about motivation interviewing, is that if it's, you try, you ask some questions, you use some really good reflections, and, when they're still going round and round with you, that's one of those things where it's definitely takes some time to potentially get to the place where they're even willing to talk about what brought them there. And so this comes back to that principle of autonomy, that at some point, for example, we want to reinforce their autonomy, that they still have a choice on what they're going to talk about. So even if they don't have a choice to get brought to therapy, right, or to sit down with you, but they have a choice about what they're going to talk about. And it's okay to remind them of that. Like, look, this is up to you. This is your time and what you want to get out of it. Kathleen, can you give me an example of how reflection was used in The Silent Man? It really was just like a lot of building on what the guy would say, that, somebody said you want to be here and you don't really want to be here. And so the guy gets to the point where, he's trying to say, so some things are, so instead of saying what's going on, Bill Miller says some things are going on that have you frustrated or have you angry. And so the guy is able to say, so this whole time then Bill Miller is not judging him. He's not asking a barrage of questions. He's just empathizing, like, yeah, you don't want to be here. These are some things that are going on. So with him being non-judgmental, the guy was able to say, well, my wife, he kind of hem-haws around a lot, but the guy says, my wife, she wants to go back to school and get more education. And he's like, we're doing just fine now. We're managing. We both work. We have our kids. Everything's fine now. So we're able to, using, our good clinical skills and using reflection to say, you're not okay with that. And so he doesn't say it in a judgmental way, and you're not okay with that. And he's like, well, no, things are just fine now. And so, something might happen if she goes back to school. Well, yeah, she might not. And he's able to say, she might not want to be with me anymore. So it's a really way, he's kind of a big, burly, Native American looking dude, kind of mumbles, and his hair's, a mess. And he's able to get him to talk about, my wife, basically, I think he hit his wife, got a domestic violence charge because they argue, because she wants to go get a more advanced nursing degree and he doesn't want her to, because he's afraid she won't want him anymore. So it is really amazing thing. So Sorry, I don't have that one in here. I guess maybe I should think about putting it in this presentation. So we want to be able to ask questions, but again, too many of them, when we might be able to actually ask it as a reflection. The other thing is that we need to ask these questions open-ended. So that's the other piece. If you're thinking of a close-ended question like, have you thought about blah, blah, blah? Or is that more about this? Instead of asking that, say it, make a guess. So we'll talk a little bit more about that with reflections, but it's better to make a guess than if you don't have to ask the question, then make it a reflection. An open-ended question, however, if you're going to ask a question, is to do it open-ended. So what, how, tell me more about it. Occasionally a why question, but you want to be careful with those. But the thing with close-ended questions is that they tend to be actually kind of really rather biased. And they can pin the sort of back the client into a corner. It can promote defensiveness, and it requires, it's a little bit more demanding, whereas a reflection can actually it actually seems like a question, because if you said, for example, do you think that's more about your confidence or lack of interest? If I said, sounds like that might be about your confidence. So you made a guess. You're not asking a question, but you know what? They're still going to think about that. They're going to think, is that accurate? Is that what I meant? And they're gonna, even if you're wrong, they're gonna clarify it for you. You've gotten the client to think. Do you wanna quit smoking? So, I mean, that could potentially even be sort of offensive. Like, well, what do you mean? Do I want to? Do you want your kids back? Some questions can actually seem very demanding instead of asking them in an open-ended type of format. So what I want you to do is, instead of asking, do you want to quit smoking? How might we ask that instead? So I think at this point, Lindsay, I think I'm able to start the poll. What question would you ask instead? Oh, dang it, and the poll is a little bit wrong. Lindsay, it's supposed to be 4 separate things.
Oh, do I need to separate the questions?
So the why do you smoke and the tell me about your smoking habits are supposed to be 2 separate things.
Oh, I can edit that quick. Just 1 second.
Okay, sorry, y'all. I should have looked more closely when I looked at them this morning. She had to type those in for me. All right, so just hang on. There's going to be a poll with some choices for questions.
Do you see it up on your screen, Angie? Okay,
Yeah.
There we go. People are
Okay,
voting.
so go ahead and make a choice, everyone. So choose one. So it looks like everybody's, anybody else still left to respond? All right, everybody? Okay. I'll just try to get it here. Okay, here we go. All right, so we have, most people chose, what are your thoughts about the idea of quitting smoking? And then we have a little bit of, the next one was what? Tell me about your smoking habits. So first of all, nobody chose, why don't you want to quit smoking? So how is that? Probably not a good question to ask. Why don't you want to quit smoking? Because what are they going to end up telling us, right? Why don't you want to do this? Yeah, it's accusatory. It's not close-ended, but it does sound judgmental. But it's also asking them for their excuses for not quitting, which is just, which is really going to just give out more sustained talk. They're not going to talk about change. That's not motivating at all. It invites you to want to argue with them about their reasons or their excuses. So congratulations, everyone, for not picking that one. But another one, even why do you smoke? Even if we mean that's a less accusatory, you know, or if you ask something like, what do you get out of smoking? You want to avoid asking that. Now, I will say when there is like that lack of problem recognition and they seem kind of resistant, then it's okay to talk a little bit about it. You know, tell me what you like about smoking. We actually do that sometimes, but we need to be careful with that when we use it. Ideally is that we're going to ask them, what do you think about quitting? And that way you're not saying, do you want to quit? You're not assuming they should quit. You're not judging them for it. You're just asking them what they think about it. Really, that is the best one to approach. Tell me about your smoking habits is just going to get them, it might explore some of you know, their coping mechanism around it. And there might be a time to ask that to help them develop a plan. But at this point, really the most, we're going to get the most out of saying, what do you think about quitting smoking? And so you're likely to get a mixture of, you know I should, but I don't really want to. You're going to get a bunch of ambivalent talk, but you can use that. That's exactly what we want in motivational interviewing. All right, good job. How do I get out of this now? Hang on, I'm having trouble with my screen. Let me close it. Okay, there we go. All right. And there's the poll. Thank you. All right. Here we go. Some more participation. All right. So the client says, I've been feeling kind of down. I'm not sure why, other than how my life has changed since working 100% from home. At least I have a job and income, but I'm alone in my apartment. And I have friends I Zoom with, but sometimes I just don't feel like doing anything. So what is an open-ended question that you might ask this client? Where would you go with it? So go ahead and type some questions into the chat. What do you think would help you not feel alone? Okay. So we're targeting that. Tell me what kind of work you do. So you want to avoid the can you. Putting can you at the front, it actually makes it close-ended, but it's what we call a permission question. And if it's a delicate topic, then I would use a can you, or do you mind telling me about that? Otherwise, just go with, tell me what kind of work you do. And that way they're more inclined to answer it. How do you feel when you Zoom with your friends? That's a good one. Okay. What does feeling alone look like at home? So I think, so in trying to understand this person, what else do we have? Tell me what your days were like before working from home. Okay, good. What kind of things are you thinking about when you wind up feeling down? Okay, very CBT. When you feel alone, what are some things that you do? Tell me more about your life before COVID. What are some things you like to do since working from home? So a little more strengths-based perspective. Could you share what are you looking for in the session that you would like to address? So you're trying to find the focus. And really what I would do is, it seems to me like there's a reflection that needs to come before we ask a question, but how have you adjusted in the past? And how have you adjusted? Okay, great. So I think in trying to get to know the person, when we ask questions about, what their life was like before, excuse me, we might be trying to find some more potential strengths. So, in terms of just trying to understand, really we're at that point of trying to engage this person and we don't know what the focus is yet, right? So we want to ask questions that get at understanding what the client's concern is. So I like the ones that were questions about, let's see, there was a couple, sorry, I'm trying to look back on them. What does feeling alone look like at home? How do you feel when you Zoom with your friends? What kinds of things did you enjoy before? I think, and then there was a question about what do you think would help you to not feel alone? Is a very good question, but we want to save that when we get to more of the solutions part, where, think about this in terms of, she or he, sorry, the client is just introducing themselves. And so it's not time to fix it yet. So in motivational interviewing, we want to make sure that we listen and that we understand first before, and we want to make sure that they're committed to what is that change that this client is looking for. So, what's it been like? I like this one that Sarah sent. What's it been like for you since working from home? So they seem like, they're not sure why they feel down. So we want to ask some questions that kind of get at, how are things different now? What was it like before? And so we want to ask questions that are going to help us get to know her concerns a little bit more. All right, so good job. So let's get into forming reflections, right? So here, this was a quote that I took from Bill Miller's book, where this Alice Miller says, listening is not merely not talking, though even that is beyond most of our power. It means taking a vigorous human interest in what is being told us. You can listen like a blank wall, or like a splendid auditorium where every sound comes back fuller and richer. I love that quote. Hang on just one second, y'all, because I'm like, I need to cough. All right, sorry, I was trying to cough and put it on mute so you don't hear me coughing. Okay, I like this quote because that was one thing that I really found about motivational interviewing. The more that I've practiced it, the more I've trained people in it, is that we are really, the way you listen it's different than when I'm purposefully trying to listen in motivational interviewing versus when I'm listening to, say, my husband or my kid, right? That there is a slight difference to it because my purpose there is different. And so I really want to take what they're saying, and I'm constantly like evaluating in my head and trying to make sense of it. And what does it mean? You know, what do I think they mean by that? How do I interpret that? So a reflection really is just making a guess about what they mean, not just what they're saying, but what they mean. And it's important to make it a statement, that we really want to avoid that inflection on the end, you know, that says, you know, that says you are angry, right? We want to make it a statement. So do you mean you're talented or you are talented? So we're making that guess. It really actually makes you kind of like more confident. I think that you sound more confident in what you're doing when we're able to really, to me, it's just being in that moment right where they are. And I'm not getting too concerned about what I'm going to say next or what my next question is. I just sort of let it kind of keep flowing until I kind of run out. You know, at some point I have to stop and go, what do I say next? But initially you are just kind of trying to turn it over in your head and constantly make sense out of it. So yeah, so I was saying you're unhappy or you're unhappy. So it often feels really weird at first, and people tend to do the, so I hear you saying, or what I hear you saying is, or sounds like, and that's okay because I still do some of that from time to time. But if we can get to just getting down to the crux of it, that it really makes you sound more confident. So I hear you're saying you're unhappy, or do you mean that you're happy, or you're unhappy? Do I have that right? That we have that tendency to, kind of question ourselves. And really, we are questioning ourselves, not just the client. So working on just being more confident with reflections, I think, is a good goal to have. And why does that matter? Well, like we mentioned, the question really sort of places the demand on a person for an answer. Whereas I think reflections just really prompt more of the thinking. And, whereas open-ended questions are a bit less demanding and typically aren't biased, they still invite them to think. But there are times that there's just something about a reflection that says, I get you, that can be really important to a client. So instead of, you don't see anything wrong with what you did, hopefully none of you would ask that. That seems pretty judgmental, doesn't it, right? But you might be thinking that, right? So it's learning how to take those things that you're thinking and say, yeah, you don't see anything wrong with what you did. And using it in that tone, and again, using all those really good nonverbals in your active listening to be with them on it and not come off as snarky or judgmental. Yeah, you don't see anything wrong with what you did. That can work like with some of those adolescents, right? It's like, yeah, you don't see why you need to be here. This isn't there, the problem isn't with them. The problem isn't with you, the problem's with them. So things like that really get at some empathy. So a statement is more accepting. And then remember, like we said, helping them feel accepted, that even if what they're experiencing is kind of messed up and we know that it's off, but then it allows them to feel safer and trust you to then consider making a change. So here's an example. So we're going to use a different example this time. So Missy had a showing of her photography at a gallery, and none of her friends showed up. So this is actually a real text from a friend of mine who's not from here. She knows that I'm using it, but I did obviously block out her name to protect her. So this is what she sent me. She said, "You'd think by now I'd be used to doing everything alone, everything by myself, neglected by my parents growing up, and put myself through college, got myself out of an abusive marriage, moved myself across country. I guess I just keep thinking or hoping someone's going to show up to support me, but it's not happening. So just don't think too deeply about this one. Just look at the surface. What do you think she's feeling? What might you say back? You're consistently let down. Mm-hmm. You're feeling alone, mm-hmm, and unsupported. I like that. Feeling hopeless, maybe. Feeling pretty alone. Yeah, good. So y'all kind of got like that's sort of the, I don't want to just say surface, but it is kind of the surface, right? Unvalidated. There are some things that, you know, you're feeling like nobody shows up for you, right? Feeling abandoned, feeling rejected. Very good. Over it. Disappointed, certainly disappointed. Uh-huh. All right, so, but we also know that we often need to go even deeper than that. If we really want to help a client better understand themselves, that, you know, it doesn't require us to be confrontational about it. It requires a really good complex reflection. And so when we think about, you know, there's the sort of, you know, you hear what they're saying and there might be one interpretation. So, you know, a lost stranger goes up to New Yorker on the street and asks, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? We're immediately thinking of directions, right? But what if the person that they're asking, the New Yorker, says, practice, 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 right? So they read something else into what this lost stranger asked. How do I get to play at Carnegie Hall is essentially what they're thinking, right? So we want to, you know, that may not be that accurate here, but we want to try to be accurate about that. And that trying to develop reflections that go beyond the tip of the iceberg, right? So the tip of the iceberg is that maybe she feels disappointed and alone at what happened, but, oh, sorry, did not see my next slide here. Okay, but accurate empathy also broadens your own perspective by sharing in the life experience of others. It is a foundation for deeper understanding and trust within family and friendships. Such deep listening truly is a gift, and one for which many people are hungry. So I have the, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, let me check my time here. Okay. Situation of being married to somebody who is, has training as a counselor. He's a health educator now and a professor, but earlier in our relationship, he was a counselor. He has a master's degree in rehab counseling. So we both know a lot of stuff. So for us to argue about things, you know, it's really not about, you know, you forgot to pick up, I'm trying to think of an example here. You know, it's not just, well, you forgot to pick up more peanut butter for me at the store. It was what they, you know, what he reads into it, that you didn't think enough of me to pick up the peanut butter, even though you know I really love peanut butter and we were out. You know, it's things like, does that make sense? So, you know, it's getting to really see something underneath, you know, what is it? What are some of the other meanings behind it? So reflective listening is a empathy skill, right? And you know, I'm used to saying reflections because that is what we call it in motivational interviewing. I know some people just may call it empathic listening. But you know, really it is a skill in that you are learning to take what they're saying and reflect it back to them. So it isn't just about confirming your understanding, right? It's also about helping them to better understand themselves. And the way you put it and hearing it from you is sort of like looking in a mirror, right? So when they hear themselves like, this is really what you're saying, so I'm going to repeat it back to you. And then they kind of, you know, hopefully for some people, it's like either it provides a way of saying, yes, that's exactly what I mean. You helped bring more clarity to me, or you're helping me think about it in a new way. Now, empathic understanding is a way of being. So this is being accepting and compassionate. It's a way of being with people that invites openness. So, for example, a friend of mine teaches, he's an educational psychologist. And anyway, it was some class he taught, and when he was looking over the student reviews, one student said that my friend, the instructor, you treated people of color differently. And my friend's response wasn't, no, I don't. I treat everybody the same. His response was, well, tell me, how can I do better? That's being open. That's inviting that acceptance and compassion, that I accept that you might have a different view of myself than I do. So let me get to know that. So how you say it matters too. So it isn't just making it a statement, but think about, as Bill Miller calls it, the music of inflection, right? So depending on what you're trying to convey, what do you really want that client to hear? So you might say it as, you are afraid of him. So it's saying you are the one that's afraid, maybe not him afraid of you, right? That might be what I'm trying to convey. Or you are afraid of him. So like, oh, you realize that it is fear, right? Or it could be, you are afraid of him. Like, fear is really what is going on here. Or you are afraid of him. Or him. You are afraid of him? I guess that would be if we're kind of asking it. So either way, right. So anyway, these all kind of slightly bring a different meaning to it depending on what you're trying to convey. So how we say it is really very important. So let's come back to Missy now. And what do we think more so? So try to, and I know you don't have any context, you don't really know her, but just try to make a guess, just sort of think a little bit more about what it might mean. So go ahead and type some more potential reflections. So not just about what she's feeling, but what might you say to her to help her better understand what she might mean? Anybody? It's a little quiet there. Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Let's see. You're hurt that you've had to experience so much alone, okay? With such a tumultuous upbringing in adult life already, no wonder this feels particularly, don't even make me try to say that, gregarious. You have overcome a lot, and it would help if people recognize it. You feel like you're having to relive all of this drama again. It's frustrating. It's good to talk about it some more. You're searching for love, compassion, and support. I like that, Richard. That's, so we want to think about like how much more could you add? And there's certainly different types of reflections. And I don't have time to go into all of those, sorry. But, you're thinking about that. Like, I like that Richards brings a little bit more, actually adds some meaning to it. Like, all of this means that you're searching for love, compassion, and support. So that brings more than just, I do think that's more than just the obvious. Let me see what else y'all said. I hear that you've been through some tough times and feel the need to talk about it. You put yourself out there with inviting them, and we're hoping for a different result and only got confirmation of how they previously treated you. That's good. Yeah, I like that one. So that's kind of helping her see maybe a pattern, right? You put yourself out there and then you don't get the response. And that just further confirms your feelings of isolation. You're not really supported. You feel like you can only depend on yourself. So that that adds a different clarity to it. So you feel alone and are missing connection with others that you desperately would like. Mm-hmm. And honestly don't remember what I said back to her. And this is actually from over a year ago, so I don't even know if I could find it in my text right now to remember what I said, and I didn't write it down. I didn't keep it in this presentation. I should have typed it in the notes. And you know, this is where it comes into, and I think I'm getting to that at some point, that, you know, with empathy, oh yeah, that's a little bit later. But you know, this is my friend, right? So I'm not her therapist. I'm not going to try to pretend to be her therapist, but it doesn't mean that I can't say something that's empathetic, right? To say, you know, I think I probably said something like, yeah, that's really disappointing. I'm sorry you had to go through that, you know, something like that, just like as a friend. I think that's sort of is what I said. But the, you know, the idea is that she is, you know, she is struggling all alone. You know, she moved literally across country. She wanted to be in this West Coast state and start over again. You know, she did leave her marriage. She's all alone. She's having trouble. She still doesn't have like a full-time job. She's, and she's actually living, she rents a room in an apartment with a woman who is a hoarder. So she's really in a bad situation. And, you know, and she has gone to therapy. She has a therapist and, you know, does all that stuff. But she, you know, is really struggling to view, you know, she notices all these things that fit her script of, you know, people walk all over me and nobody's really there for me. And so she's kind of gets stuck on that script. Rather than, and there are examples of times that people were there for her and really did some nice things for her since she moved out there. But that wouldn't be helpful, right? That wouldn't be helpful to say, well, but remember that time that so-and-so came and took you to Las Vegas for the weekend? Like, that's not what she needs, right? That's not empathetic. That's trying to fix it for her. All right. So, oh yeah, so what I'm going to do is we'll do this one. I think this will be the last breakout, Lindsay, because I'm running out of time. And I still have a few more strategies to go over. So this will be the last breakout, but I want you to now practice giving some reflections. And so, you know, try to avoid asking any questions. So decide who's going to be the speaker. And so just something, you can use something I feel, preferably something you feel ambivalent about. Like there's something that you know, and you can use a client role play if you prefer. But, you know, think about something where you're just not sure that you want to change it, maybe something you're thinking about, and then the partner will offer reflections and try to understand what the speaker means. Oh, okay, and then you might have time to switch roles. We'll see. So we'll do just a little bit of that. We'll break out for, and you might be in group, I guess you might be in more than, if there's more than two people, you know, one person can be the observer. Okay, so if you do end up in a room with more than two people in it, okay? So decide who's going to be the speaker, who's going to be the listener, and just spend, you know, a few minutes. So maybe do like a 5 minutes, Lindsay, break them out for about 5 minutes and then end it and bring everybody back. Okay, I think we have most people back. So, so how did that go? Who wants to, let me get my chat box back up. And how did you do with forming reflections? How easy was it for you? You know, some of you are seasoned therapists, right? And how did it feel if you were the speaker? So we have one that says it was easy. Okay, good. Felt great to be related to. Validating, definitely. What else? Let me get a couple more comments. It was easy because I paid attention to what she was presenting in the conversation. Yes, really listening, right? Wish you had more time, but it was easier to reflect because you've been where they were. Yeah, felt listened to. Awesome. The speaker, she did a really good job. I felt heard. Great. Helped me feel comfortable, right? Listening and understanding. Yeah. Yeah. So, and while you all are pretty much willing participants at this point, even when they're not so willing participants, the idea that someone, that's part of demonstrating that compassion, right? Is to really actively listening. And yeah, they really heard you. Okay. But, finding, even when we're not there yet, that somebody understands that, it can still potentially, maybe help us think about something in that different way, to get to ask those questions and to use really good reflections to help us to better understand ourselves. And it's not confrontational, right? It's not in a way that necessarily puts the person on the defensive. Now, I've had some people say, sometimes my clients get annoyed with reflections, and that, they say, well, that's what I just said, and they get irritated. Well, that happens when we tend to be too simplistic or too simple in our reflections. So that's where, trying to work on this and really getting at that empathy piece is important, and to really understand, help them to bring new meaning to it. And you can use reflections to move it a step forward. So when they're feeling like it sounds like you're just talking about how something is a problem, but then we say, add something like, and you'd like to do something about it. So we're not asking, we just say it. That can make the person feel comfortable transitioning. Rather than asking, they're like, yeah, I want to do something different. And so that helps move you into that next part of the discussion. So let's move on. I have a few more and we're running out of time. So I want to make sure you at least hear all the strategies, and then you can practice some of these on your own. But, I mentioned affirmations being really important. And this is part of helping a client build confidence. I think that my fourth Motivational Monday is going to be on building hope and confidence. And so part of helping a client build confidence is affirming them. It's dealing with that sense of feeling demoralized, like I can't change, I can't do anything about it, is giving them affirmations. And so, sometimes I found this cute little cartoon that, sometimes actually those are some pretty valid reasons to be depressed, right? Sometimes validating them is an important part, right? But here's what I mean. Really get in that habit of noticing and appreciating something about your client, right? It doesn't have to be huge, but it does need to be genuine and not exaggerated. So I like to say that it's a way of viewing our clients as the glass is half full rather than half empty. So how can you find something in there? For a while, I ran a behavioral health court in Covington, and our judge would say, he had gone to, San Francisco or somewhere, and observed their mental health court. And he was just surprised to hear that judge commend a client on relapsing on alcohol, but not heroin. And he just, that sounds ridiculous on the surface, right? But when you understand affirmations was that, hey, you stayed away from heroin, that's a big deal, right? So finding something to notice. And one way to think about that is to use the acronym VACE. So you can notice something about their values. Values are what's important to them, right? What are those symbols and things in their life that are really important? So you might comment like, your recovery really means a lot to you. So telling them that can really mean something like, you believe me, you know that I'm taking this serious. Or noting something about their attributes, like you're very persistent and don't give up easily. Or their strengths, you have a lot of good support around you, so you notice something positive in their surroundings, right? Or something positive about what's happening. And then there's efforts. I can see that you've been putting a lot of focus into managing your anger, so commending them on their efforts, right? So those are potential examples of how we might form different kinds of affirmations. And this is something that, so yes, you want to notice this in your client, but for example, if you work with couples, this is something you could assign to them, that you make an effort to give each other affirmations once a day or, whatever, right? So these do help you demonstrate compassion. It can help actually reduce defensiveness. So that if you have somebody who is angry or defensive, like, I don't even want to be here, that you say something like, you say something like, I just lost my train of thought, sorry. You know, well, I really respect that you even showed up here today. You know, I appreciate that you came in at all. So it's like finding that. In some ways, they're almost like reframing reflections at times. So you're trying to find the positive in something and reflect it back. So here's the exercise you might give someone. You know, affirm someone you particularly admire or who has made a positive impact in your life, and tell them or write it down. So who is it? So, well, I'm not going to have you guys do this because we're running out of time. But, you know, who is the person, you know, and why have they made a positive impact? So what is something positive that you would say to them? All right. So just a few more words. So empathic understanding really is about, so not just listening, but understanding is to understand and value differences, right? That we can hear what their perspective is, appreciate those differences, still make, you know, maybe collaborate, right? Oh, this is what I was talking about earlier. So how's reflective listening different from conversation? So, you know, conversation really is about taking turns offering our own perspectives, right? So when you're talking with friends and using empathy, or you're talking with a partner or a child even, you know, it's like taking turns that, you know, I offer, it's self-disclosure is okay, right? It's definitely okay, and we're sharing back and forth. Whereas, you know, really pure reflective listening is solely focused on the other person. So again, it doesn't mean that you don't self-disclose, but the disclosure isn't about benefiting you or helping you feel better. It's a disclosure for the intent of helping the other person, right? It's meant for them. So can you use reflective listening in your conversations? I hope so. And I'm sure there's some ways that you do, but I just encourage you to think about how can you take a little bit more time. For example, I have a 13-year-old daughter. Pray for me, please. And, you know, she's really a good kid. I'm actually very, very lucky, but she gets, you know, she has challenges sometimes when other people frustrate her and they don't always get her, that she's a very artistic person. She's into theater. She's not into sports. So she's very different from almost all of her classmates, and that she feels kind of picked on and, you know, verbally bullied at times. So when she talks to me about things, she doesn't necessarily want me to fix it. You know, I don't say, well, do this or have you tried that? Is I simply say, that sounds like a really rough day, right? So using reflections in that way that help her to understand. Now, if they ask, you know, well, what did you do when you were my age? Or if your patient asks you, what do you think? Then you can share it, obviously. But, you know, we try not to give advice, you give options. So here's one way that I handle it. Here's what other clients have felt helpful. So trying to keep it from just being like, here's what I did, so I think you should do this, right? So reflective listening, that we can use that in our conversations with people. So here's an example you might use. And what was I did with this one? The goal is to listen and understand the ambivalence without offering suggestions or judgments. So this would have been like another activity, I guess, that we could have done. Sometimes what I do with this one is, and I'm basically taking a 3-hour workshop and putting in 2 hours. So that's why I'm kind of struggling a little bit with the time here. But what I did was we actually did a role play. I did a demonstration in the front. And so we kind of tried it in front and, you know, did it that way where, you know, we try to think about how hard it is sometimes to not make suggestions, and that really we're just trying to hear it and understand it and spending 5 minutes doing that, not trying to fix it in those 5 minutes that we're just listening. So that could be something you could even try if you do like couples or you work with a parent and a child, that can they talk without trying to persuade the person to their side, that they're just simply listening to each other. All right. And then in empathic understanding in close relationships, we do often confuse the need for understanding for the need for problem solving. If you've never seen It's Not About the Nail, actually I might go ahead, it's very, very short, that this is sometimes what happens in our relationships. If, and this is, I'm not trying to say that all men are like this, but it is like, if you've ever read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, that men do tend to be the fixers. This happens in my relationship. I think it's very short.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
Sorry, thank you.
Oh, shoot.
Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't.
So I always think that one's cute. Okay. So there's a couple other strategies that you do have in the PowerPoint. And I'll resend it in the chat here just in case some of you, because I know sometimes you close the chat by accident or you got out of the meeting by accident, you lose everything that was in the chat. So I'll resend it so you have that. But you can do, Bill Miller talks about like making a list of P's and D's, what pleases, this is like a good exercise with partners, what pleases you that they do and what displeases. I also suggest that you try to have them create the list for each other first, and so I would make a list of what I think my husband likes it when I do and what he doesn't like it when I do. So I'll make a list from his perspective and he makes one from mine. So that would really build empathy skills there. How well do you understand each other? And then also work on listening for values. So, values can conflict. And, just because we, have these these three things that you value, sometimes those can get in the way. And so that makes it difficult to maybe make a decision that, yes, I do think, taking care of my health is very important by eating healthy, but I also think that I need self-care and it's a really tough time right now. So, do I eat those cookies or not? Right? So I have conflicting values about that. So here's something you might have talk about is, what do you care about most? Have your client identify maybe like their 5 top values, maybe even rank order them, and ask them some questions about those values. How do you suppose these came to be so important to you? How are you using these values in your life now? When is it particularly difficult to actually follow that value? How might you go against it sometimes? And how might you better express it and practice it in your daily life? So this can help people understand why they don't prioritize changes sometimes. So that it's because there's these different conflicting values. So it doesn't mean that you don't think that's important, but some other value might be taking precedence. So that's a way to help people kind of build discrepancy, build discrepancy, but also try to figure out, how do I prioritize this change? what values do I need to pay more attention to rather than others to make this work? All right, awesome. So I got through it. All right, so empathic understanding can be a far-reaching choice. It is a way of being that rejects the illusion of us versus them. It is a step away from tribal thinking that envisions winners and losers and toward an understanding of humankind as one diverse, interrelated family. We are not required to do this, but our very survival may depend upon empathic understanding. You might want to put that on your Facebook page. Okay, but that's kind of what really made me think about stuff that's going on today. So make an effort to consider both sides. Empathy does not equal agreement, simply understanding. So this is my contact information, my website. Like I said, I do have a book coming out. So if you pay attention to my website or check back, it will be coming out. And I do have more Motivational Mondays coming up if you enjoyed this one. All right, thank you. All right, Lindsay.